Lyra didn't know that the man watching her from across the royal harvest ball was the most powerful alpha in the Seven Kingdoms. She didn't know that his wolf had already claimed her as mate the moment she walked through those golden doors, and she certainly didn't know that in less than an hour her life would change forever when her escort abandoned her to the wolves. But right now, pressed against the marble pillar with her heart hammering against her ribs, all she knew was shame. The borrowed gown hung loose in places where it should have hugged, tight in others where it should have flowed. Deep emerald silk that had looked magnificent in the servants' quarters now felt like a costume, a lie draped over her too thin frame. The seamstress had done her best with pins and hurried stitches, but there was only so much magic thread could work. "Stop fidgeting!" Marcus hissed, his fingers digging into her elbow hard enough to bruise. "You're drawing attention." Lyra forced her hands to still, though every instinct screamed at her to run. The ballroom stretched before them like a glittering sea of silk and jewels, crystal chandeliers casting rainbow fractals across the polished floor. Lords and ladies moved in elegant clusters, their laughter musical, their conversations a low hum beneath the orchestra's melody. She had dreamed of this moment for weeks, ever since Marcus had grudgingly agreed to escort her, claiming he needed a date to maintain appearances at court. "Just don't embarrass me," he'd warned. "Remember what you are." What she was: a bastard, a servant, the unwanted reminder of her father's indiscretion, raised in the shadows of her legitimate cousin's home. "There she is!" Marcus's voice changed, warming in a way it never did when he spoke to Lyra. "Lady Catherine." Lyra followed his gaze to the vision in silver silk gliding toward them. Lady Catherine Ashford moved like liquid starlight, her golden hair swept into an elaborate crown of braids, diamonds glittering at her throat. She was everything Lyra wasn't: elegant, entitled, effortlessly beautiful. "Marcus, darling." Catherine's smile was radiant as she slipped her hand through his arm, completely ignoring Lyra's existence. "I wondered where you disappeared to. The Duke of Ravencrest has been asking for you." "Has he?" Marcus straightened, puffing with pride. "Well, we can't keep his grace waiting." Lyra's stomach dropped. "Marcus, wait!" But he was already walking away, Lady Catherine's melodic laugh floating back as she said something that made him throw back his head in delight. Lyra stood frozen, watching her only anchor in this sea of nobility drift away without a backward glance. The whispers started almost immediately. "Who is that girl? Never seen her before. She must be new. Look at that dress, the way it hangs. Surely she can't be... Is she alone? How gauche!" Lyra's cheeks burned. She pressed deeper into the shadows by the pillar, wishing the marble would swallow her whole. Around her, the ball continued in brilliant splendour. Couples swept across the dance floor in perfect synchrony, their movements a choreographed dream of romance and grace. She didn't belong here. She had known it the moment the invitation arrived, written in Marcus's careless scrawl. Had known it when the head housekeeper grudgingly allowed her to borrow one of the ladies' old gowns. Had known it when the carriage pulled up to the palace gates, and she saw the other guests arriving in equipages that cost more than her entire family earned in a year. But she had hoped. Gods, how she had hoped. "Excuse me, miss." A smooth voice made her jump. A young lord with kind eyes and an expensive jacket approached, bowing slightly. "Forgive me, but you seem to be without a partner. Might I have the honour of the next dance?" For one wild moment Lyra's heart soared. Then she caught sight of his friends snickering behind him, their eyes bright with malicious amusement. The invitation was a joke, a dare, something to laugh about later over wine and cards. I'm waiting for someone," she managed, her voice barely above a whisper. "Of course you are." His smile turned pitying. "How foolish of me." He melted back into the crowd, leaving Lyra more alone than before. The laughter seemed louder now, the stares more pointed. She caught fragments of conversation drifting past like poisoned arrows. "Servant's daughter, I'm told." What was Marcus thinking, bringing her here? Quite presumptuous, really. Her throat constricted. The walls of the ballroom pressed closer, the air thick with perfume and judgment. She needed to leave. Now. Before this got any worse. Before someone realized exactly who she was and what she was doing here. But as she took a step toward the door, her breath caught. Someone was watching her. Across the ballroom, through the swirling dancers and chattering nobility, a man stood perfectly still. Tall and broad-shouldered, wearing midnight black that made him seem carved from shadow. His dark hair was pulled back, revealing a face that belonged in marble halls and throne rooms. Strong jaw, sharp cheekbones, eyes the colour of storm clouds. And those eyes were fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. For a heartbeat, the entire ballroom faded away. The music dimmed to a whisper. The crowd became a blur of moving colour. There was only him, watching her with a focus so complete it felt like being touched. Then Lady Catherine's voice cut through the spell like a blade. "Marcus, you simply must tell me about your little charity case." Her tone was sweetly vicious, designed to carry. "How noble of you to bring a servant to the royal ball, though I do wonder if she knows which fork to use." Laughter rippled outward from their cluster, spreading like spilled wine across white cloth. Marcus's uncomfortable chuckle was the final crack in Lyra's already fractured composure. She pressed her back against the pillar and fought the sting of tears. The mysterious man across the room took a step forward, his expression darkening like a storm about to break. But Lyra couldn't watch any more, couldn't bear to see pity in those beautiful eyes. She closed hers tight and wished with everything in her that she could simply disappear. The royal harvest ball continued around her in all its glittering glory, and Lyra had never felt more invisible in her life. Across the ballroom, Darius Blackthorne watched the small drama unfold with predatory stillness. His wolf had recognized her the moment she entered, that subtle shift in scent that spoke of pine forests and winter mornings, of something wild trying to hide beneath careful manners. She didn't know what she was yet, didn't understand that the nervous energy humming through her veins was power waiting to wake. But he knew. The Alpha King of the Seven Kingdoms knew exactly what treasure had walked into his court dressed in borrowed silk and shame. "Your Majesty?" Lord Aldrich appeared at his elbow, wine-flushed and eager. The Duke of Ravencrest was hoping for a word about the Northern Territories. Later. Darius didn't take his eyes off the girl pressed against the marble pillar. She was trying to disappear, shrinking into herself like a flower closing against winter's bite. Around her, the vultures circled with their whispers and sly glances. His hands clenched into fists. He'd been watching for nearly an hour, studying the way she moved through his court like a deer among wolves. The cousin who'd brought her had abandoned her the moment something better appeared. Typical. The weak always sacrificed the innocent to save themselves, but it was the soft devastation in her dark eyes that made his wolf snarl. She was breaking, right here, in his ballroom, surrounded by his nobles who should know better than to mock what belonged to him, even if she didn't know it yet. "Sire," Aldrich pressed, confusion clear in his voice. "Is something wrong?" Everything was wrong. His mate was hurting, and he was standing here like a statue instead of claiming what was his. But he'd learned patience in his 30 years of rule, learned that the wrong move at the wrong moment could shatter something precious beyond repair. She was frightened enough already. One wrong step and she'd bolt. The orchestra struck up a new waltz, couples flowing onto the dance floor in ripples of colour and grace. Near the refreshment table, he caught sight of Lady Catherine's golden head, bent close to the dark-haired lord who'd brought his mate. Marcus something or other. A minor noble with major debts and the survival instincts of a cornered rat. The woman was beautiful, Darius supposed, all sharp edges and calculated smiles, the kind of beauty that photographed well and complemented a man's ambitions. She moved through the crowd collecting admirers like a gardener gathering roses, each one another step up the social ladder. His mate, by contrast, looked like she wanted to sink through the floor. The young Lord Pembroke approached her then, all swagger and cruel amusement. Darius recognised the setup immediately, the friends lurking nearby, the barely suppressed laughter, the invitation designed to humiliate. His vision went red around the edges. Nobody mocked his mate, nobody, but she handled it with grace that humbled him. A soft refusal, eyes downcast, no trace of the anger she had every right to feel. She was protecting them, he realised. Even now, even hurting, she was taking care not to cause a scene that might embarrass the cousin who'd abandoned her. Magnificent. Absolutely magnificent. That was the moment Lady Catherine's voice cut across the ballroom like broken glass. "Marcus, you simply must tell me about your little charity case. How noble of you to bring a servant to the royal ball, though I do wonder if she knows which fork to use." The laughter that followed was sharp and bright and vicious. His mate flinched like she'd been struck, pressing deeper into the shadows. Her face crumpled for just an instant before she controlled it, but that flash of pure anguish was enough. Darius moved. The crowd parted before him without conscious thought, conversations dying mid-sentence as the Alpha King crossed his own ballroom with lethal purpose. He heard his name whispered, felt the ripple of awareness spread outward like stones dropped in still water. "Your Majesty, the King. Where is he going?" He ignored them all. His focus had narrowed to a single point, the girl in green silk who was fighting tears with her eyes squeezed shut. She didn't see him coming, didn't sense the way the entire room held its breath as he stopped before her, close enough to catch that wild, sweet scent that made his wolf pace and hunger. "Miss!" Her eyes flew open, dark and wide and impossibly beautiful. Up close, he could see the gold flecks that caught the chandelier light, the way her pulse fluttered at her throat like a trapped bird. She was even lovelier than he'd thought, all delicate bones and soft curves barely contained by the gown that someone else had worn first. Perfect. She was absolutely perfect. "Your Majesty!" The words came out strangled. She started to curtsy, wobbling on legs that had gone liquid, but his hand shot out to steady her elbow. The contact sent electricity racing up his arm. Her gasp told him she felt it too, that spark of recognition that said, "Mate, mine, forever." Her eyes went huge, confusion and something deeper flickering in their depths. "I don't believe we've been introduced." His voice came out rougher than intended. Being this close to her was like standing next to a bonfire, all heat and light and the promise of being consumed. I'm nobody important, Your Majesty." She tried to step back, but there was nowhere to go with the pillar at her spine. "I shouldn't even be here, I was just... Dance with me." The words fell into sudden, absolute silence. Around them, the ballroom had gone still as a photograph. 300 nobles frozen in place, watching their king extend an impossible invitation to a girl in borrowed clothes. She stared at him like he'd spoken in a foreign language. "Your Majesty, I couldn't possibly—" It wasn't a request. But his tone stayed gentle, the words more coaxing than commanding. "Dance with me." Her breath caught. Behind them he could hear the whispers starting again, sharper now, shocked and speculative. Let them talk, let them wonder. In 5 minutes it wouldn't matter what any of them thought. I don't know the steps." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I've never danced at court. I'll embarrass you." Impossible. She couldn't embarrass him if she tried. She was his mate, his queen, his everything. She just didn't know it yet. "Then I'll teach you." He offered his hand, palm up, patient as stone. "Trust me." For a heartbeat she hesitated. He could see the war playing out across her expressive face. Disbelief warring with hope, fear battling something that looked dangerously like longing. Around them the silence stretched taut as a bowstring. Then, moving like she was walking toward her own execution, she placed her small hand in his. The mate bond snapped into place with the force of a lightning strike. Mine, his wolf snarled in satisfaction. Finally, mine. Darius kept his expression carefully controlled as he led her onto the dance floor, but inside he was roaring triumph. She was trembling like a leaf in his arms, overwhelmed by the attention and the impossibility of the moment. She had no idea that he'd been waiting his entire life for her to walk through those doors. The orchestra, reading the room with practiced skill, struck up a slow waltz, simple steps, easy to follow. He pulled her closer, one hand settling at her waist, the other engulfing her delicate fingers. "Look at me," he murmured. "Not them, just me." She obeyed, those beautiful dark eyes locking with his. The rest of the ballroom faded away. The staring nobles, the whispered speculation, the shocked faces of her cousin and his cruel companion. There was only this, his mate in his arms moving to music that seemed written for them alone. "What's your name?" he asked quietly. "Lyra." Her voice was soft as silk. "Lyra Ashworth." "Lyra." He tasted the name, let it roll across his tongue like honey. Beautiful. A blush stained her cheeks pink as roses. "Your Majesty?" "Darius. My name is Darius." Her eyes went impossibly wide. "I couldn't possibly—" "You can. You will." He spun her gently, supporting her weight as she followed his lead with surprising grace. "See, you're a natural." The wonder that bloomed across her face was worth every shocked stare from his court. She was seeing herself differently now, feeling the way she moved like water in his arms, the way the steps came naturally when she stopped thinking and simply trusted him. This was how it would be, he knew, her learning to trust him. Him teaching her to see herself through his eyes, not as the unwanted bastard daughter or the servant in borrowed clothes, but as the queen she was born to be, his queen, his mate, his everything. The waltz came to an end far too soon. Around them, the ballroom erupted in polite applause, but Darius barely heard it. He was too busy memorizing the way Lyra looked in this moment, flushed and breathless and beautiful, her hand still nestled in his. "Thank you," she whispered, the words meant for him alone. That was magical. It was perfect, and it was. She was perfect. "Come, I think we need to talk." Darius led her through a set of French doors onto a moonlit balcony, away from the staring eyes and whispered speculation. The cool night air was a relief against Lyra's burning cheeks, though it did nothing to calm the wild hammering of her heart. She couldn't stop trembling. Not from the cold. The warmth from his hand at the small of her back seemed to radiate through her entire body, but from the impossibility of what had just happened. The king, the Alpha King himself, had danced with her, in front of everyone, in front of Marcus and Lady Catherine and 300 nobles who now knew exactly what she was and exactly how far above her station she had dared to reach. "I shouldn't have accepted," she whispered, gripping the stone balustrade with white knuckles. "I should have refused. I should have—" "Breathed," Darius said gently, moving to stand beside her. "You should breathe." She tried to obey, dragging air into lungs that felt too tight. The garden stretched before them in the moonlight, all silver roses and shadowed paths that disappeared into darkness. Beautiful, peaceful, nothing like the chaos in her chest. "Your Majesty, I need to explain. Do you know what I see when I look at you?" The quiet question stopped her rambling mid-sentence. She turned to find him watching her with those storm-grey eyes, his expression serious in the moonlight. "A servant," she said automatically. "A nobody who doesn't belong here, someone who just ruined your reputation by accepting a dance she had no right to." "Wrong." His voice carried absolute certainty. "I see someone who walked into a room full of predators with her head held high, someone who handled cruelty with grace and loneliness with dignity, someone who moves like music even when she thinks no one is watching." Her breath caught. "You were watching me?" "From the moment you walked through those doors." He turned to face her fully, and the intensity in his gaze made her knees weak. Before you ask why, let me tell you something about wolves that most humans don't understand. Wolves. Her pulse skittered. Everyone knew the king was a shifter, that most of the royal bloodlines carried wolf genetics, but hearing him reference it so casually made it real in a way that court gossip never could. "We know our mates by scent," he continued, his voice soft as silk. "By the way our wolves react to their presence, by an instinct older than civilization itself." Lyra's world tilted. Mates? The one person in all the world meant to be ours, our other half, our perfect match. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his grey eyes, could smell cedar and winter storms on his skin. The person we've been waiting our entire lives to find. She pressed back against the balustrade, overwhelmed. "Your Majesty, I think there's been a mistake. Darius." The correction was gentle, but implacable. "And there's no mistake. I've ruled for 15 years, Lyra. I've met every eligible woman in the 7 kingdoms and half the ones beyond our borders. I've had mothers throw their daughters at my feet and diplomats offer their sisters for political advantage." His hand came up to cup her cheek, thumb brushing across skin that felt like it was on fire. "And in all that time, nothing. No recognition, no connection, until tonight, until you." The mate bond. She'd heard the phrase whispered in servants' quarters, seen it referenced in the romantic novels she borrowed from the library. The supernatural connection that bound shifter couples together, deeper than love, stronger than choice. But those were stories, fairy tales, not real, never real for girls like her. I can't be. She struggled for words that made sense. "I'm nobody. A bastard daughter raised as a servant. I don't even know who my father was. My mother took that secret to her grave." "None of that matters? Of course it matters." The words burst out of her, desperate and raw. "I serve tea and mend clothes and scrub floors. I've never been to court, never learned proper etiquette. I don't know how to curtsy without wobbling or which fork to use for fish. I borrowed this dress from the charity box in the servants' hall because I don't own anything suitable for a royal ball." Her voice cracked on the last words, all the shame and inadequacy she'd been carrying flooding out in an unstoppable tide. "I can't be your mate. People like me don't get fairy tale endings." For a long moment Darius said nothing. Then, to her complete shock, he laughed. Not mockingly, the sound was warm and rich and full of genuine delight. "People like you," he repeated, shaking his head. "Do you know what people like you are, Lyra Ashworth?" She shook her head, not trusting her voice. "Brave." His thumb traced the line of her jaw with infinite tenderness. "Resilient, kind despite having every reason to be bitter. Strong enough to survive in a world that's tried to break you, yet gentle enough to worry about embarrassing the cousin who abandoned you." Each word fell like a blessing she didn't deserve. "Your Majesty." "Darius," he corrected again. "And I need you to understand something. I've spent 15 years surrounded by people who were born to wealth and privilege, people who've never known hunger or fear or the sting of being overlooked. They're perfectly polite and appropriately educated and absolutely devastatingly boring." His other hand came up to frame her face, holding her captive with his gaze. "You think being a bastard daughter makes you unworthy? I think it makes you real. You think not knowing court etiquette disqualifies you. I think it means you'll speak honestly instead of telling me what you think I want to hear." "But I don't understand," she whispered. "Why me? You could have anyone. Ladies who know how to be queens, who understand politics and diplomacy and who would see the crown, not the man wearing it." His voice went rough around the edges, and for the first time she heard something that sounded like loneliness. "Do you know how long it's been since someone looked at me and saw just Darius? Since someone worried about embarrassing me instead of calculating what they could gain from my attention?" The vulnerability in his voice undid her. This powerful, intimidating man, the Alpha King who commanded armies and shaped the fate of nations, sounded as lost as she felt. "I see you," she said softly. "When you asked me to dance, when you were so patient with my clumsy steps, I saw you, not the crown, just you." Something fierce and possessive flashed in his eyes. "That," he said, "is why you're my mate, that right there." The mate bond hummed between them like a living thing, that strange warmth she'd felt during their dance now spreading through her chest like honey. Part of her, the part that had grown up on fairy tales and dreams, wanted to believe, wanted to step into this impossible story and trust that somehow, against all odds, she was enough. But the rest of her, the part forged by years of being unwanted and overlooked, whispered warnings. "I'm scared," she admitted. "This is all so fast, so impossible. Yesterday I was polishing silver in Marcus's kitchen. Today you're telling me I'm meant to be your queen. How do I even begin to process that?" "You don't have to process anything right now." His hand slid down to capture hers, engulfing her small fingers in warmth and calluses that spoke of sword work and hard training. "All I'm asking is that you don't run. Stay. Give me a chance to prove that this is real." "Stay where?" "Here, at the palace, as my guest." He must have seen the panic that flashed across her face, because he added quickly, "With a full complement of chaperones and your own quarters, nothing inappropriate, just time for both of us to understand what this means." Her logical mind screamed that this was madness, that girls like her didn't get rescued by kings, didn't get invited to live in palaces, didn't get offered fairy tale endings. But her heart was already lost. "Marcus will be furious," she said weakly. "Marcus will be grateful I don't have him thrown in the dungeons for abandoning you." The steel in Darius's voice made her shiver. "Don't worry about your cousin, Lyra. You're under my protection now." Protection. The word settled around her like a warm cloak. When had anyone ever protected her? When had anyone ever put her first? "I don't have anything with me," she said, and immediately felt foolish for the practical concern. "No clothes, no possessions, just this dress. We'll send someone to collect your things, and if there's nothing worth collecting—" His smile was gentle. "Well, queens need extensive wardrobes anyway." Queen. The word made her dizzy. "You're serious about this," she breathed. "About all of this?" "Deadly serious." He lifted their joined hands, pressing a soft kiss to her knuckles that sent electricity racing up her arm. "I've waited 31 years to find you, Lyra. Now that I have, I'm not letting you go." The mate bond pulsed between them, warm and insistent and undeniably real. She could feel it settling into her bones, could sense the rightness of standing here with him in the moonlight while the ball continued without them. Maybe fairy tales could happen to servant girls after all. "Okay," she whispered, "I'll stay." The smile that transformed his face was brilliant as sunrise. They returned to the ballroom hand in hand, and the reaction was immediate. Conversations died mid-sentence. Couples paused in their dancing. 300 pairs of eyes tracked their movement across the polished floor with the intensity of hawks watching prey. Lyra felt the weight of their stares like a physical thing, pressing against her shoulders and making her steps falter. "Steady," Darius murmured, his thumb stroking across her knuckles. "You belong here." She tried to believe him, but the whispers that followed in their wake told a different story. Holding hands with a servant? Has he lost his mind? What will the council say? Near the refreshment table, she spotted Marcus's dark head, bent close to Lady Catherine's golden one, their faces tight with what looked like panic. As they approached, both straightened with the guilty quickness of children caught raiding the cookie jar. "Your Majesty." Marcus's bow was so deep it was almost a grovel, but his eyes when he straightened were calculating. "What an unexpected honour. I trust you've enjoyed dancing with my dear cousin?" Cousin. He'd never called her that before. The word dripped with false affection, like honey poured over poison. "Indeed." Darius's voice was perfectly polite, but something in his tone made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. Miss Ashworth is quite remarkable." "Oh yes, our little Lyra has always been special." Marcus's laugh was too bright, too loud. "Though I'm sure your Majesty has more pressing matters to attend to, important guests to greet, political discussions to—" "Actually, I was hoping to speak with you about your cousin's circumstances." Darius's interruption was silk wrapped around steel. "I understand she resides in your household?" Lady Catherine stepped forward then, her smile sharp as broken glass. "Your Majesty is too kind to take an interest in the help." The word dripped disdain. "But I'm afraid you may have been misled about dear Lyra's station." Lyra's stomach dropped. She knew that tone, recognised the predatory gleam in Catherine's pale blue eyes. This was the moment she'd been dreading, when her shameful history would be laid bare before the one person whose opinion had begun to matter. "Oh?" Darius's voice remained conversational, but his grip on her hand tightened protectively. "Well, we simply must tell the truth, mustn't we?" Catherine's laugh was like wind chimes made of razors. "Lyra isn't really family, you see. She's the bastard daughter of some long-forgotten indiscretion. We took her in out of Christian charity when her mother died. Such a sad story, really." The words hit like physical blows. Lyra felt her cheeks burn with familiar shame, the old wound tearing open fresh and raw. Around them she could hear the sharp intake of breath from eavesdropping nobles, could feel their judgment settling over her like a suffocating blanket. "She's been our kitchen maid for years," Marcus added, warming to the theme. "Quite good with her hands, actually. Excellent at scrubbing pots and mending linens, though I suppose tonight she's gotten ideas rather above her station." "That dress she's wearing," Catherine's voice dropped to a stage whisper designed to carry. "Borrowed from our charity box. We couldn't have her attending in rags, could we? Though I dare say she's forgotten her place rather thoroughly." The laughter that followed was crystal bright and vicious. Lyra closed her eyes, wishing the marble floor would open and swallow her whole. This was what she'd feared, what she'd known would happen. The fairy tale was over before it had truly begun. "I'm sorry," she whispered to Darius, the words barely audible. "I should have told you. I should have—" "You should have nothing to apologise for." The words cut through the cruel laughter like a blade through silk. When Lyra opened her eyes, she found Darius staring at Marcus and Catherine with an expression that would have frozen hellfire. The temperature in the ballroom seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Let me make sure I understand," Darius said, his voice carrying the deadly quiet that preceded storms. "You're telling me that you took in an orphaned child, raised her as a servant in your home, and brought her here tonight as what? Entertainment? A joke?" Marcus's face went pale. "Your Majesty, I merely thought—" "You thought you'd parade her in front of the court like a dancing bear for your amusement." Each word was precisely enunciated, sharp enough to draw blood. "You thought you'd let her be mocked and humiliated while you pursued your own interests elsewhere." "Now, see here," Marcus blustered, but his voice shook. "She's lived under my roof for 12 years, fed at my table, slept under my protection." "Protection?" Darius's laugh was winter itself. "You call this protection, abandoning her the moment you arrived, letting her be tormented by your peers while you courted another woman's favour?" Around them, the ballroom had gone dead silent. Even the orchestra had stopped playing, sensing the dangerous tension crackling through the air like lightning before a strike. Lady Catherine, either braver or more foolish than her companion, lifted her chin defiantly. "Your Majesty, surely you can see that a girl of her background has no place in proper society. It was kind of Marcus to bring her at all, really. One must maintain standards." "Standards." Darius repeated the word like it tasted bitter. "Tell me, Lady Catherine, what standards allow you to mock an orphan child? What breeding permits you to take pleasure in another's humiliation?" Catherine's perfect composure cracked, uncertainty flickering across her features. Your Majesty, I merely—" "You merely revealed exactly what sort of person you are." Darius stepped forward, and both Marcus and Catherine shrank back as if he were a wolf showing teeth. Let me be very clear about something. Miss Ashworth is under my personal protection. She will be residing at the palace as my guest. And if I hear so much as a whisper of disrespect toward her from either of you, you'll find yourselves banished from court permanently." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a funeral pyre. Marcus's face had gone from pale to green, and Catherine looked like she might faint. "Your Majesty," Marcus stammered, "surely you don't mean—" "I mean every word." Darius's voice could have cut diamond. "Miss Ashworth has shown more grace and dignity in one evening than either of you have displayed in your entire lives. She is worth a dozen of your sort." He turned to face the crowd that had gathered, his storm-grey eyes sweeping over the assembled nobles like a king surveying his battlefield. When he spoke, his voice carried to every corner of the ballroom. "Let me address any confusion that may exist. Miss Lyra Ashworth is my honoured guest. She will be treated with the respect due to someone under royal protection. Anyone who chooses to disregard this will answer directly to me." The silence that followed was absolute. 300 nobles stood frozen, absorbing the implications of what they'd just witnessed. The Alpha King himself had claimed a servant girl, defended her against the very people who'd brought her, and made his protection a matter of public record. Lyra stared up at Darius in wonder and disbelief. No one had ever defended her before. No one had ever stood up to Marcus, let alone humiliated him in front of the entire court. The man beside her had just reshaped her entire world with a few carefully chosen words. "You didn't have to do that," she whispered. He looked down at her, and the fierce protectiveness in his eyes made her breath catch. "Yes, I did. You're mine to protect now, Lyra, and I protect what's mine." The mate bond hummed between them, stronger now, deeper. She could feel it settling into her bones, like coming home after a lifetime of wandering. This man, this powerful, impossible man, had chosen her, had claimed her publicly and without reservation. Maybe fairy tales were real after all. Marcus cleared his throat nervously. "Your Majesty, if I've given offence—" "You have." Darius didn't even look at him. "Considerably. But Miss Ashworth is more forgiving than I am, so I'll give you one piece of advice. Leave, now, before I decide that banishment isn't sufficient punishment for your treatment of her." They left, Marcus practically dragging the stunned Catherine behind him as they fled toward the exit, their heads down and their dignity in tatters. The crowd parted before them like they carried plague, no one wanting to be associated with the king's displeasure. As they disappeared through the ballroom doors, conversations gradually resumed. Couples returned to the dance floor. The orchestra struck up a new melody, but Lyra could feel the difference in the way people looked at her now. No longer with mockery or dismissal, but with careful consideration. She was under the Alpha King's protection. She mattered. "Come," Darius said gently, offering his arm. "I think we've had enough excitement for one evening. Let me show you to your rooms." She took his arm, marvelling at how natural it felt, how right. As they walked through the crowd that now watched with respectful attention rather than cruel amusement, she felt something she'd never experienced before. She felt like she belonged. The guest chambers Darius led her to were more luxurious than anything Lyra had ever imagined. Silk wallpaper in soft cream and gold, furniture that belonged in museums, windows that overlooked moonlit gardens where white roses climbed ancient stone walls. A fire crackled in the marble fireplace, casting dancing shadows across Persian rugs that cost more than most people earned in a lifetime. "This can't be for me," she whispered, standing frozen in the doorway. "There must be some mistake." "No mistake." Darius moved past her to light the oil lamps, warm golden light blooming throughout the room. "These will be your chambers for as long as you wish to stay." Forever, her heart whispered traitorously. She wanted to stay forever, but the practical part of her mind, the part forged by years of disappointment, whispered warnings. This was too good to be true. Things like this didn't happen to girls like her. Any moment now she would wake up in her narrow servant's bed and find this had all been an impossible dream. "Your Majesty, Darius." The correction was gentle but firm. "In private, you call me Darius." She nodded, though the name still felt strange on her tongue. Too familiar, too intimate. "Darius, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me." He turned from the fireplace, giving her his full attention. "Ask. Is this real?" The words came out smaller than she intended. "This whole evening, the mate bond, your protection, is any of it real? Or am I just some amusing diversion that you'll tire of when the novelty wears off?" The pain that flashed across his features told her the question had landed like a physical blow. "Lyra, I'm sorry, I know it sounds ungrateful, but I need to understand." She wrapped her arms around herself, suddenly cold despite the warm room. "People like me don't get rescued by kings. We don't get fairy tale endings. We get used and discarded and forgotten. So please just tell me the truth. What happens when you realize I'm not special enough to be your queen?" For a long moment, Darius said nothing. Then he moved toward her with careful, deliberate steps, like approaching a wounded animal that might bolt. "May I touch you?" he asked quietly. She nodded, not trusting her voice. His hands came up to frame her face with infinite gentleness, thumbs brushing away tears she hadn't realized were falling. "The mate bond isn't a choice, Lyra. It's not something that fades or changes with time. It's written in our souls, deeper than thought or preference or social convention." "But what if—" "No." His voice was soft but absolute. "Let me explain something about wolves that humans often don't understand. We mate once, for life. When we find our destined partner, everything else becomes background noise. Titles, politics, what other people think, none of it matters anymore." His eyes held hers, storm grey and utterly serious. "I've been Alpha King for 15 years. I've had advisors throwing suitable brides at me since the day I took the crown. Duchesses, princesses, heiresses from across the continent. Beautiful, educated, politically advantageous women who would have made perfectly acceptable queens. Then why? Because they weren't you." The simple words carried the weight of absolute truth. "Because when I danced with them, I felt nothing. When they spoke, I heard calculation instead of honesty. When they looked at me, they saw a crown to claim, not a man to love." His thumbs traced the line of her cheekbones, and she felt that familiar warmth spreading through her chest. "But you, when you look at me, you see Darius. When you speak to me, you forget to be intimidated by my title. When you're in my arms, you're not thinking about power or politics or what you can gain from my attention." "Because I'm nobody," she whispered. "I don't know how to play those games. Because you're everything." His voice went rough with emotion. "Because you're genuine and kind and brave enough to trust, despite having every reason not to. Because you've survived cruelty without becoming cruel yourself." He leaned his forehead against hers, and she could feel his breath warm against her lips. "Do you know what loneliness feels like when you're surrounded by hundreds of people who all want something from you? When every conversation is a negotiation and every smile has an agenda behind it?" She did know. Not the same kind of loneliness. Hers had been the isolation of being unwanted, but loneliness nonetheless. "Yes. I've lived with that for 15 years, until tonight, until you looked at me like I was worth something beyond my crown." His hands slid down to capture hers, engulfing her fingers in warmth. "That's why this is real, Lyra. That's why you're not some passing fancy or momentary distraction. You're the mate my wolf has been searching for. You're the woman my heart has been waiting for. You're home." The words settled around her like a benediction. Healing wounds she'd carried for so long, she'd forgotten what it felt like to be whole. But the fear was still there, whispering in the back of her mind. "What if I can't be what you need?" she asked. "What if I embarrass you in front of the court, or say the wrong thing to foreign dignitaries, or—" Then I'll teach you." His smile was soft as silk. "Just like I taught you to dance tonight, we'll learn together. But I'm not educated. I can barely read beyond kitchen recipes and household accounts. I don't know languages or history or... I have tutors, the best in the kingdom." He brought her hands to his lips, pressing gentle kisses to her knuckles that made her shiver. "But more importantly, you have something that can't be taught. You have a good heart. You have compassion and courage and the kind of strength that comes from surviving hardship without becoming bitter." She stared at him through tears that blurred her vision. "You really believe that?" "I know it." His voice carried absolute certainty. "I've seen you take abuse with grace. I've watched you worry about embarrassing the very people who were mocking you. I've felt the way you put others before yourself, even when you're hurting." He released her hands to cup her face again. "Those are the qualities that make a true queen, Lyra. Not bloodlines or education or political connections. Heart. And you have the biggest heart I've ever encountered." Something inside her chest cracked open, letting warmth flood through spaces that had been cold and empty for as long as she could remember. For the first time in her life, someone saw value in who she was, rather than dismissing her for what she lacked. "I'm scared," she admitted. "This is all so overwhelming. Yesterday I was invisible. Today you're asking me to be a queen." "I'm not asking you to be anything other than yourself." His thumb traced her bottom lip with devastating gentleness. "That's all I want, Lyra. Just you, exactly as you are." The mate bond hummed between them, warm and insistent and undeniably real. She could feel it settling deeper into her bones with each passing moment, could sense the rightness of standing here with him in the firelight while the world outside faded away. "If I stay," she said softly, "if I accept this, there's no going back, is there?" "No." His honesty was brutal and beautiful. "If you stay, you're choosing a life in the public eye. You're choosing to be scrutinized and judged and held to impossible standards. You're choosing responsibility for an entire kingdom." He paused, his eyes searching hers. "But you're also choosing to be loved. Completely, unconditionally, forever. You're choosing a partner who will defend you against anything and anyone who tries to hurt you. You're choosing a life where you matter, where your voice is heard, where your happiness is someone else's most important priority." The choice hung between them like a bridge over a chasm. On one side lay everything familiar: servitude, invisibility, the safety of having no expectations placed upon her. On the other lay the unknown: power, responsibility, and the terrifying possibility of being loved beyond measure. "I've never felt safe anywhere," she whispered. "Not really. There was always the fear that I'd be turned out, that I'd do something wrong and lose even the little I had. You'll never feel that way again." His promise was iron wrapped in silk. "Whatever happens, whatever mistakes you make, whatever challenges we face, you'll always have a home with me. Always." The tears came then, hot and healing and impossible to stop. All the years of believing she was worthless, all the nights of falling asleep wondering if anyone would ever want her, all the dreams she'd been too afraid to voice, it all poured out in a flood of relief and gratitude and tentative hope. Darius pulled her against his chest, strong arms wrapping around her like a shield against the world. She could hear his heartbeat beneath her ear, steady and sure and real. "Stay," he murmured against her hair. "Choose us. Choose this. Choose love." She pulled back to look at him through tear-blurred eyes, memorizing the face of the man who had changed her life in a single evening. The man who saw worth where others saw shame, who offered protection where she'd only known vulnerability. "Yes," she whispered, the word barely audible but carrying the weight of her entire future. "I choose you. I choose this. I choose love." The smile that transformed his face was brilliant as sunrise. He cupped her face in his hands and lowered his head until their lips were barely touching. "May I kiss you?" he asked, the question a breath against her mouth. "Please." The kiss was gentle at first, reverent, like a promise being sealed, but as she melted against him, as her hands fisted in his shirt, and she kissed him back with all the hope and gratitude and desperate love blooming in her chest, it deepened into something that spoke of forever. When they finally broke apart, breathless and clinging to each other, Lyra felt fundamentally changed. The frightened servant girl who had entered the ballroom that evening was gone, replaced by a woman who was loved, protected, chosen. "I love you," she whispered against his lips, the words she'd never said to anyone spilling out like a prayer. "I love you too," he whispered back, "my mate, my queen, my everything." Outside, the palace bells chimed midnight, marking the end of one life and the beginning of another. 3 months later, Lyra stood before the floor-length mirror in her chambers and marvelled at the woman staring back at her. The reflection showed a future queen in ivory silk and golden thread, her dark hair swept into an elegant crown of braids woven through with pearls and tiny white roses. The gown had been crafted specifically for her by the kingdom's finest seamstresses. No borrowed clothes, no charity box cast-offs, but something beautiful made just for her. But it wasn't the external transformation that took her breath away. It was the confidence in her posture, the light in her eyes, the way she stood like someone who knew she belonged exactly where she was. "Ready, my lady?" Elena, her lady's maid, approached with the final touch, a delicate circlet of silver and diamonds that would mark her as the future Lunar Queen. "As ready as I'll ever be," Lyra replied, though her stomach fluttered with nervous anticipation. Today was their official mating ceremony, the public declaration that would bind them not just in the eyes of the wolf gods, but before the entire kingdom. The past 3 months had been a whirlwind of preparation. Language lessons with patient tutors who taught her the diplomatic phrases needed for foreign dignitaries, etiquette instruction that showed her which fork to use and how to navigate court politics without making enemies, history lessons that filled in the gaps in her education, helping her understand the kingdom she would help rule. But more than that, they had been 3 months of learning to trust in her own worth, of discovering that her instincts for kindness and justice were exactly what Darius valued most in a partner, of realizing that her humble origins gave her insight into the lives of common people that no noble-born queen could match. "His Majesty is waiting in the courtyard," Elena said softly, adjusting the circlet until it sat perfectly. "Shall I tell him you're ready?" "Please." Alone for a moment, Lyra took one last look at herself in the mirror. The frightened servant girl who had been abandoned at a ball was gone, replaced by a woman who had learned to see herself through the eyes of someone who loved her completely. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. "Come in." The door opened to reveal not Elena, but Marcus. Her cousin stood awkwardly in the doorway, hat in hand, looking older and somehow diminished from the arrogant man who had brought her to the ball 3 months ago. "Lyra?" His voice was uncertain, stripped of its former condescension. I was hoping we might speak before the ceremony." She studied his face, seeing genuine discomfort there, maybe even shame. "What is it, Marcus?" "I wanted to apologize." The words came out in a rush, as if he'd been rehearsing them. "For how I treated you that night, for how I've treated you all these years. I was wrong, and I'm sorry." Behind him she caught sight of his wife Margaret and their daughter Sarah, both dressed in their finest gowns and looking nervous. Lady Catherine was notably absent. Word had it she'd married a minor lord in a distant province after being quietly blacklisted from court. "You brought your family," Lyra observed. "We were hoping, that is, we wondered if you might find it in your heart to forgive us, to let us be part of your life again." His voice cracked slightly. "Sarah talks about you constantly. She misses her cousin Lyra." Little Sarah stepped forward then, all 6 years of her dressed in pink silk and ribbons. "Cousin Lyra, are you really going to be a queen?" The innocence in her voice melted something in Lyra's chest. Whatever Marcus's faults, his daughter had always been kind to her, sneaking down to the kitchens for stories and hugs when her parents weren't watching. "I am," Lyra said gently, kneeling to Sarah's level. "And queens need friends who knew them before they wore crowns. Would you like to be my friend, Sarah?" The little girl nodded eagerly, throwing her arms around Lyra's neck. "I've missed you so much." Over Sarah's head, Lyra met Marcus's eyes. She saw regret there, and perhaps the beginning of real understanding of what he'd lost through his cruelty. The old Lyra might have harboured resentment, might have taken pleasure in his discomfort, but the woman she'd become understood that mercy was often more powerful than revenge. "You hurt me, Marcus," she said quietly, "deeply, for years, but I won't let that pain poison what comes next." Relief flooded his features. "Thank you. I don't deserve your forgiveness, but—" "No," she agreed, "you don't, but I'm not giving it for you. I'm giving it for me, and for her." She stroked Sarah's hair gently. "Family should mean something. Maybe we can figure out what that looks like." She stood, smoothing her skirts. "You may attend the ceremony, but understand, I'm not the same frightened girl you once knew. I'm under the protection of the Alpha King, and I have his love and respect. If you ever try to hurt me again, you'll answer to him." Marcus nodded quickly. "Of course, absolutely. We'll do better." Another knock on the door interrupted them. This time it was Elena, her eyes bright with excitement. "My lady, His Majesty says it's time." Lyra's heart fluttered with anticipation rather than fear. "Then let's not keep him waiting." The courtyard had been transformed into something from a fairy tale. White roses and silver ribbons decorated every surface, and the ancient stone altar where royal matings had been blessed for centuries gleamed in the afternoon sunlight. Hundreds of guests filled the carefully arranged seating, nobles, diplomats and common folk alike, invited to witness their future queen accept her crown. But Lyra only had eyes for the man waiting at the altar. Darius wore ceremonial robes of midnight blue and gold, his dark hair gleaming in the sunlight, his storm-grey eyes fixed on her with an intensity that made her knees weak. When their gazes met across the courtyard, his face transformed with a smile so brilliant it rivalled the sun. He held out his hand as she approached, and she placed her fingers in his without hesitation. The mate bond hummed between them, stronger now, deeper, settled into their very bones like coming home. "My beautiful queen," he murmured for her ears alone. "My patient king," she whispered back, making him chuckle. The ceremony itself passed in a blur of ancient words and sacred rituals, vows spoken in old tongue that bound their souls together for eternity. The exchange of rings carved with wolves running beneath crescent moons. The moment when Darius lifted the lunar crown, not a circlet this time, but a true crown of silver and moonstones, and placed it gently on her head. "All hail Queen Lyra," the officiant declared, and the courtyard erupted in celebration. But the moment that would stay with her forever came during their first dance as true mates. As they moved together in perfect synchrony, Darius leaned close and whispered, "Do you remember what you said that first night? That people like you don't get fairy tale endings?" She smiled, thinking of how far she'd travelled from that frightened girl in borrowed silk. "I was wrong. You were." His eyes sparkled with mischief. "People like you create fairy tale endings. You make them real for everyone around you." Later, as the celebration continued into the evening, Lyra found herself in the palace gardens with Darius, finally stealing a quiet moment away from their guests. They sat together on a marble bench beneath the white roses that had become her signature flower, her crown set carefully aside, his formal robes exchanged for simple clothes. "Any regrets?" he asked softly, stroking her hair in the moonlight. She thought of the servant girl who had scrubbed floors and mended clothes, who had believed herself worthless and unwanted. Then she thought of the woman she'd become, loved, protected, valued, not despite her origins, but because of the strength they'd given her. "Only one," she said finally. His hand stilled. "What's that?" "I regret that it took me so long to believe I was worthy of love." She turned to face him fully, cupping his face in her hands the way he'd done to her that first night on the balcony. "But I believe it now, because of you." The kiss they shared was soft and sweet and full of promise. Around them, the white roses bloomed in the moonlight, and somewhere in the distance they could hear music and laughter from their guests still celebrating. "I love you, Queen Lyra," Darius murmured against her lips. "I love you too, my king," she whispered back, "forever and always." And in the garden where fairy tales were born, the Alpha King and his Lunar Queen began their happily ever after. Where are you listening from? Let's meet in the comments. I love hearing your thoughts on these stories of love conquering all. If you'd like to support me and help more people discover these tales of hope and healing, please subscribe. It's free and it means the world to me.